right, well, for today, we here at Universe Immersion are going to be focusing on the subject of good universes equal good storytelling. Now, of course, every good storyline begins with 6 basic rules. I'm not sure if I remember all 6 of them, but here goes. Rule number 1 is the plot. And that's going to be very surprising because most people would probably think it's the characters, but if you look at it from a logical standpoint, most of the best concepts start with a very interesting plot. I'll cite, for example, The Lord of the Rings compared to The Hobbit. If we're just going from the movies standpoint and not the books, I think everyone would have to admit that the Lord of the Rings movies were substantially better than The Hobbit, although in the book, you could say the book was better than The Lord of the Rings. But we'll just cite the movies for now as an example. In the Lord of the Rings movies, it was very, very focused around the plot of the Lord of the Rings. The ring, Sauron, the history of the ring, and the relation of the characters came as a secondary point. Frodo was very driven by his plot line, and he's more or less the main character. Aragorn was also very driven by his plot line, and he is the second main character for sure. But you see, in The Hobbit, the character Bilbo was the very much the main focus of the story. And you can easily tell that. Thorin Oakenshield is also a very big player in the story, as is Gandalf Graham. You see these characters play out a little bit of a story, nothing too complex. A lot of the details just follow them around. But at the end of the day, you'd have to say the scope of The Hobbit was not nearly as large as Lord of the Rings. And when it comes to drawing those giant crowds for, fandoms and, universe creation, you would have to say The Lord of the Rings can do a substantially better job than The Hobbit can, simply because it is focused on plot. Now, back to the rules of 6, characters are the second focal point of your story. A book by Nancy Ellen Dodd I was reading recently points this out quite clearly. Characters are a very, very big point of the story because it's something we can all relate to, because we all are characters, obviously, and it's something that we can really get around. We all live our lives out in first person, we'll use that term, and the characters live out the life of the story in first person as well, but the plot is not necessarily centered around one character, the protagonist or the antagonist, say in the case of Avengers Infinity War, the movie, where the character Thanos was a very big point of the story, but he himself was not the only point of the story. And then you look at any protagonist, pick one, and he will be a very major point of the story, but not necessarily the main point of the story. The main point of the story is the plot line. Now, third are atmospheres, I think. The third, fourth, and fifth, I'm a little rusty on right now. I can't think of what they are, but suffice to say, they're just the bonus materials. The world, like the setting, what your setting's going to be. You do have to have a certain focus to that setting. Then there's backup details and bonus details and stuff like that. And then last but not least, there is the music of your story. But the fifth one was, I think fifth one is like the art of the story, like the actual physical art, the stuff that you actually see with your eyes. And then the sixth one is, of course, music. Music very much speaks to the soul. It kind of gives you a deeper sense of what the feeling is. It can be very hard to portray a feeling through to the human mind from just a story, especially on a primitive storytelling agent like a book or something, a magazine. Magazines are a little better, but you still have that problem. But if you have music, for example, with this, a sound score, a good sound score, more notably, poor sound scores don't really deliver the same effect. You can very much transmit a lot. You can very easily transmit a lot of story content through the ideas that is happening in the ideas that are happening in the music. Um, so those are the main 6 points of storytelling, and these points of storytelling, if not 100% followed to the letter, should be at least followed in the principle. So, for example, Gregg Everman, always start my stories with a few ideas, a few things. You try to get a beginning and an end to your story. You have to know where you begin and where it ends. And you also try to get some of the details along the way, the middle part of the story, which can be the most important part of the story, because the beginning and the end every story has. And every story, of course, should have a middle part, but the middle part can range in any which way. But you have to know where the story begins and where it more or less is aiming to go. Now, this isn't to say that the end and the beginnings can't be played with if, when you are creating the middle parts of the story, a lot is changing. You realize that where you originally wanted to go is not quite where you want to go anymore, and you can adapt. But in the meantime, if you are confident in your beginning and ending ideas, even if they're not completely thought out in your head, then you probably should consider sticking to them and trying to make the middle parts accommodate for them, and not necessarily trying to just begin with those and then, as soon as they're no longer needed, to cash them out. Now, for the essential reason why we create a story, now this is very important. A lot of people create stories as a means of acquiring a living. Whether this is to make millions or even just to make enough to get by, this is probably not the best place to start. And a lot of excuses could be made, and a lot of them are quite valid, I'm sure. I myself have had them many times. But I would have to argue that no excuse is really good enough apart from the moralistic approach. Stories come from the heart, and they should come from the heart, especially good ones. Poor stories are usually written for ulterior motives, to keep up one's reputation, or to earn money, or to anything that just seems like one of the lower forms of writing a story, even if done for the proper reasons, can often result in subpar stories. You see them all the time. I call them dime a dozen stories. You go to a bookstore anywhere, and you see endless volumes of books that are absolutely redundant, who the author didn't give a darn about the story. And even if he did give a darn, it wasn't enough of a darn to do anything original, or to use his actual brain to try to figure out a good approach for this story. Often our stories come from a lot of places. When I was younger, a lot of my stories came from the love of video games. That was back during the quote-unquote golden age of video gaming, which was actually rather true. There was an age in video gaming where stories were substantially better than they are now. This didn't last very long, but it lasted long enough for a kid like me to really get enthused by it. Games like Halo 3 and Gears of War 1 and Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2 and some of the Final Fantasy titles were all right. Games of this idea, even a game like Need for Speed Carbon, which is a rare one, was a very, very story-driven game. And these type of things really they really made a kid like me think about, invent his own stuff. And I'm sure we've all been through stuff like this where we get inspired by something, but the inspiration comes from a lot of places, right? We get inspired from a lot of places. Sometimes it's just the day-to-day lives. Sometimes it's our jobs, our occupation, our lives at home. It can be a movie we saw, a book we read. It can really be anything. And that inspiration is not in itself bad. That inspiration is usually where a story begins. As a matter of fact, I would argue that it is almost exclusively where a story originates from. However, this story is not perfect in itself. This story has to be run through what you might almost call a you filter. What you want to say is where that story has to go through. So you invent the story, right? And it pieces itself together in your head. And you like the story, it seems pretty good. It seems like one of your better concepts, say. This story then has to go through the process which you want to take it down. And where you want to take it down is where the problems can really begin. The problems can begin with you wanting reputation or money or advantage or bragging rights or whatever. And that's most certainly not a good place for it to go down, because then you will pick the least common denominator of story. And when I say least common denominator, I mean you will pick the story that is going to get you, say, maximum fans, maximum take for least effort. You'll often look to genres for this. You'll look to whatever's popular, and you'll study that. And that's not good, because then that original story idea you had will be pretty much thrown out because it doesn't fit in with a popular genre, say. Maybe it does. Maybe it got lucky. That will happen. But the best stories are not made from copying genres. Every now and then you will get a good one. It's pretty rare. I would argue it's very rare. But it will happen. This is probably because the author was not 100% committed to following the genre, and he loosened it up a little bit. He went in there with his own game plan, and he most certainly did a better job than most people do in copying genres. Because when most people copy genres, they are just writing the lowest common denominator, what's going to get maximum fans, maximum profit, or such and such, and what's not going to become lost, dead, worthless. No one wants to view that piece of entertainment. Everyone just says that was some weird thing that some guy tried one day. No one wants to fit into that, even if it's just for your own upkeep. It hurts when you fall into that category. I think a lot of people can understand that. When you fall into that category of, wow, why did this guy try something original? Just stick to the genres, buddy. You don't have an original thought to bless yourself with, and any that you do have, they're all bad. No one wants to hear that. Because that's very damning. That very much hurts the author. And it probably isn't the worst thing to hear a few times in your life, just to keep you on your toes and show you that not every thought is a good one. Not every idea is a good one. There are bad ideas that you come up with and you're really excited about them. It's going through your brain and you're just thinking this is the best idea ever and you can't see anything wrong with it. And then when it actually gets down, pen gets to paper, or whatever story medium you're using, and then suddenly the critics start saying that this is just terrible. The online comments start picking it apart, and it's very, very hard to take, because that is a part of you in there. When you write the lowest common denominator, there is no you involved. You know that it's a tried and tested system. Maybe it's not a tried and true system, but it is a tried and tested system where if it doesn't work, you can always fall back on the genre's just not hot right now, or it just got caught in all the clutter of all the other people using that same genre. And that's a pretty good escape There's not really the big crushing of the spirit. Whereas when you go out on a limb and you fail, it can be very, very hard to take. And a lot of people don't want to go through this, and I can understand that. I've written stuff myself that has not been received well, and it is very hard to take. I've criticized entertainment that really didn't deserve to be criticized, and it was actually fine. I just thought I saw something that was there that wasn't. This happens to everyone, and when you go all in and you're proven wrong, it is hard to take. You do often feel like dirt. You feel that you've got no real reason to be saying anything because your opinion. But always know this: the best stories ever, any medium you can think of, always came from the heart and came from an original place. I would argue, show me any great concept, any great execution of an idea, and I will tell you that it is an original of that idea. Maybe there were plenty of copycats who copied that person, but his is the original idea. Lord of the Rings, very original. Hobbit, very original, although that's both J.R.R. Tolkien, so we'll get out of that genre. But Star Wars was not the most original, but a very, very good compilation of a lot of unoriginal ideas to make quite an original plot. I think we would all have to agree. Marvel's Avengers, when it first came out, was quite original. No one had really ever tried anything like it before. Let's try video games. Halo 3, Halo 2, and Halo 1. Very original ideas. Look at how original Halo 2 was. I mean, that game had more original stuff than anyone had ever seen before. Let's go the book Ben-Hur. If any of you have ever read that or seen the movie is, in my opinion, even better. Very, very original idea. Copied off of the ideas of some previous renditions of the Christ story, but is still very original in itself. I don't think anyone could argue that. Most of the very great stuff you will see in your life was the original. And there are examples of some copying versions being good. I would say The Hunger Games is a fairly good example of this. Maybe not the first book ever to write the kind of female protagonist in the the end of the world and trying to, having to become the symbol of the world. Probably The Hunger Games is not the first book to do this. I can't think of another myself, but I'm sure many of you can. However, it was a very good compilation of ideas and probably had a lot of original thinking of its own put behind it. So most of the great ideas you're going to find, especially the exceptional ideas, I would argue almost all of the exceptional ideas, were 100% original. So if you are going for the least common denominator, which you are allowed to do, there's nothing wrong with doing it. I know a lot of people who've done it and done it well. You should not be expected to excel that highly in this. These should become the low-level players, the people who are not expected to rise above everyone else. That's not to say they couldn't and they shouldn't, but it is to say they should not be expected to. These should be considered the low-level things, and they should be judged as standard entertainment, nothing exceptional. Now, here at Universe Immersion, I'm Gregg Everman, the founder of Universe Immersion. It's a channel that I've began, and I'm looking to keep it going for as long as possible. I really enjoy doing it, and I would like to be able to continue it for as long as possible. Hopefully I get good enough reviews where I can keep that going. But here at Universe Immersion, not only am I trying to tell you great stories, but I'm also trying to tell you the impact these great stories have and why it's necessary for all stories to be treated by the author as though there's something exceptional. Whether they are or not, they should be considered something exceptional because it's the only way for the author to truly believe in what he's saying and to put that extra bit of himself into this production. And he might fail, as I've stated before, he might fail. And he might feel really bad about his failure, but he didn't fail in the fact that he put 100% of himself into it and didn't just try to fit into a genre, a popular genre. Whether he fit into one or not is regardless. I'm saying he didn't try to, but rather he was trying to do something very thought-provoking, very not very interesting, and very telling of creating a mirror for reality. Now, granted, I'm talking mostly about fiction here. If you're writing real life drama, that you are writing reality, and you need to portray it as well as you can, and you need to portray it in a manner that people can really fathom being in the shoes of that scenario, of that character, of that event. But when, in the case of fiction, when we're writing this, we need to put 100% of ourselves into it in order that it may be the best possible thing we could have done. In order that there isn't any reservation left. We believe in what we're saying what we believe, and we're not just writing something for the sake of getting something out of it. We're writing this for a greater good, a good that transcends even us. It's not even so much about us anymore. I think in a lot of my writings I feel that it isn't about me. Whether the book or movie or whatever it is I'm working on succeeds or whether it fails, it really doesn't matter. To me, anyway. If it succeeded in what I thought it had to do. Because at the end of the day, that's what we should be focused on. At the end of the day, we shouldn't be focused on trying to earn something from this. Because now if you are in a desperate situation, obviously or this is your livelihood, I suppose one could make the argument, but even then, know that you are writing from a disadvantage. Know that you are writing to get something, and you're not necessarily writing 100% from the heart, which can be a little bit dangerous. Make sure that you are, at least relatively speaking, what you want to speak. Or if you're going to try to fit yourself into a genre, make sure that the genre is what you're trying to say, and it isn't just something you're doing because it's 100% popular. I would argue that you should try not to write something for the sake of money ever, or popularity, or whatever it is you're writing it for. But if you have to, know that you're writing from a disadvantage, and know that your popularity isn't necessarily, or the money you earn from it, isn't necessarily a good thing if you don't believe what you had to write down was for the greater good. So, to all of us creators out there, I won't call us authors, I won't call us directors or producers or whatever, I'll call us, to all of us creators out there who create magnificent pieces of fiction, one could add in nonfiction as well. To all of us creators, know that what you're doing, what you're putting down, shapes the world. It does. It shapes it in every single way. It is our future. What you write down will change the future. Not can, will. It will change people's lives. It will make people look at the world a different way. What you write down needs to come through from deep down. What you write down needs to come through from deep down. Don't just put something down. Don't just be the guy who says, I wrote 15,000 words in 4 days. Be the guy who says, I wrote 1,500 words in 4 days, but they were exactly what I wanted to say. Even if they weren't done properly, they were exactly what I wanted to say. That's what we as creators have to do. It isn't our job to make something, a medium, that earns us our day-to-day living. That can be our job, but it isn't the nature of our job. The nature of our job is to shape society by our works. Shape the way people think by our works. That is the nature of creators. That is their job. They're not in it for themselves. They're not in it for money, glory, popularity, any of this. They're in it for the greater good. They have to be in it for the greater good, or what they produce will be flawed. And this includes a lot. This includes even some entertainment which seems good in itself. Initially, it seems very good. I take Game of Thrones as an example. Game of Thrones in itself seems fairly good. There's a lot of originality in that. And it seems that George R.R. Martin, or I think that's his name anyway, it seems that he put a lot of himself into his books. And maybe he did, but that's not to say what he put into his books was good. Right? A lot of what he put into his books was very bad. Game of Thrones is very pornographic, very inappropriate series, not meant at all for any audience, in my opinion. So what he put into his books was perversion. So even when you're putting your heart and soul into something, like George R.R. Martin, for example, even when you're putting your heart and soul into it, make sure that your heart and soul are in the right place, because what you're saying does, with as many Z's as you can imagine, what you're saying does transmit. It does shape the way people think. The evidence of this is anywhere and everywhere. It's all around you. If you can't see it, look online for people who can see it. You will see so much example of it. What we see and what we hear is what we believe very often, and influences us in ways we almost can't imagine. There are just infinite ways stuff like this can influence us, and it's up to us to understand. It's up to us creators to understand that what we are putting on paper shapes the future. So be wise with what you put on paper. Be very wise. And remember, it's never for nothing. When you're writing something from the depths of your heart and you believe in it and everything about it is true to you, those writings, they can even change your life. That's how powerful they are. So be good writers, be good creators, and remember, there is always a greater good to fight for, to die for if needs be. This is Gregg Everman from Universe Immersion. This is one of my first talks. And I hope that you continue to tune into Universe Immersion for not only my own personal opinion, but also for the great stories, obviously more for the great stories, scratch that, which I'm going to be producing. And I'll try to keep Universe Immersion up and running and going as well as I can. But until that point, I was just enjoying the videos that I'm going to be posting. I'll try to edit them as well as I can. There may be flaws in them along the way. In the meantime, I'm trying to couple it with my writing time, which isn't the easiest thing. It's a bit of a chore, but I like to keep it going. In the meantime, I'll be producing and jotting down as many stories as I can for you, for your entertainment alone. I'm not in this for money. I might try to get a bit of money here and there just to manage myself and just to, you know, the world does require money. No one's going to argue that. But in the meantime, I'm not in this for the money. If I got $0.00 out of this, that'd be okay, provided it was what I wanted it to be. All right. You guys have a good day, and I'll be seeing you soon. This is Universe Immersion, signing off.